Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. Great to have you on this Monday. We are presented by Gatorade on, I think, one of the best days of the year because Selection Sunday's fun and you get those matchups, but on Monday you actually get to really dive in and dissect the brackets. It's amazing to go through the potential matchups. It's just a ton of fun.
Yeah, I got to apologize to my family in advance because I'm going to be sitting in front of the TV for the next 3 weeks. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of great basketball, a lot of parity across not only the Big Ten, but across the country. I think this is going to be one of the most exciting tournaments that we've had to date.
No doubt. I'd say there's a lot of competition this week for the best days. Like Selection Sunday's a great day. This is a great day because you dive in. Thursday and Friday are unbelievable.
Yes.
Just the wall-to-wall basketball is so much fun. Let's get into our big story. Again, it is those 8 Big Ten teams headed to March Madness. 5 are going to play on Thursday and 3 on Friday. Maryland, West Virginia gets us going very early on day 1. Illinois, Iowa, Northwestern, Penn State, all in action on that first day. Purdue did get the 1 seed in the East. They'll tip off Friday evening with Indiana, the final Big Ten team to play. They battle MAC tourney champ Kent State. Let's start here with Purdue, and again, a 1 seed in the East. Thoughts on the draw for the Boilermakers?
I really like the draw. I mean, I think it's going to be a challenging game, assuming they get past that 1-16 game, potentially playing Memphis, an older team, a team that has a ton of athleticism. Kendrick Davis is one of the best guards in the country. So I think that's going to be a tough matchup. But I like the fact that Purdue has a ton of great perimeter defenders. I mean, you talk about Brandon Newman coming on as of late as a great perimeter defender. Ethan Morton is another guy that can get after guys. And so I like the fact that they have a lot of veterans that can kind of carry the load on the defensive end. I think three-point shooting is going to be a big key because a lot of teams, they're not used to playing a guy like Zach Edey. So they're going to double team, triple team, maybe even quadruple team. And so I think that the schematic standpoint, teams aren't going to be as crafty in terms of, switching up their looks in terms of how they guard Zach Edey. So I think there's going to be a lot of open threes for Purdue in the NCAA tournament. So it's going to be a matter of knocking those down and having confidence.
I'm with you. I think the fact that David Jenkins came on a little bit in the Big Ten tournament, actually a lot of bit in the Big Ten tournament, really helps them because just the truth of the matter is, particularly Fletcher Lawyer has just struggled so much with his shot. It just feels like, for whatever reason, I would love to see him come along here, but it just feels like, for whatever reason, maybe he's hit a bit of a wall, and so they're going to need some others. Brandon Newman has stepped up here in recent weeks. I agree with you, particularly if it ends up, look, FAU's a good team too.
Yes.
And so that's a challenging 8-9 matchup, whoever gets it. But you look at Memphis, they have played 4 games against the number 1 seeds so far this year. They won 1 against Houston yesterday. Now, Houston didn't have Marcus Sasser.
Right.
So I get that. But they lost the other 3 by 13 points. They lost to Alabama in Tuscaloosa by 3 points.
Yeah.
So this is a team that has played really good teams this year. You talk about the how good they are, how good Kendrick Davis is. So this will not be easy for Purdue. And then you look at Marquette, who's the 2 seed in that region. Marquette is playing extremely well. They won 14 of 15. They just won the Big East. I mean, you get into the NCAA tournament, there are good teams in your region. It's just the way that it works. But I do think that's potentially hairy 8-9 matchup for Purdue, whoever wins that game.
Yeah, and I think, too, when you look at it, those are a lot of teams that have a lot of depth and that can press. And we know that Purdue has really struggled with pressure, last in the conference and turning over the basketball. And one of the things they always kind of seem to get, and it happened in the Penn State game, the championship, is getting in that coffin corner, right, where you kind of get into those dead spots of the floor where you don't really have a lot of help. You have to be strong with the basketball. That's why I think, like you mentioned, David Jenkins is so important to kind of take on some of the ball handling responsibilities along with Braden Smith. You need those veterans who have played in big-time games to kind of get you into your offense, to settle things down, to make sure the ball goes to where it needs to go to. So I think David Jenkins, is going to be probably one of the most important players to kind of handle the ball responsibility, especially you talk about a Marquette, a team with Shaka Smart that, pressures a lot. Memphis is a team that has a lot of athletes that's older, that's stronger, physical, and tough. So it's going to be big, the guard play for Purdue.
You look at some other teams in that region. I mean, were they to run into Tennessee? Tennessee's got injury problems right now, but they are a great defensive team.
Yep.
You've got Duke, who's playing really, really well, playing far and away its best basketball of the year. So again, I mean, I'm just going to repeat what I said a moment ago. Like every single region you look through and you're like,
tough.
well, that's potential landmine, that's potential landmine. Purdue's really good. Like they wouldn't be a 1 seed if they weren't really good. They have a player that no one else in the country has a comparable. It has a comparable type matchup for. Yeah. So no one, like I do think when you're in the Big Ten and you've played Purdue over the years and you've kind of learned how to deal with Zach Edey, that's not to say that it's easy. I mean, the guy was Big Ten Player of the Year. He's going to be National Player of the Year. He tore up the league in a lot of ways, but at least you've seen it before.
Yeah.
I do think there's like a shock and awe value to the first time you go up against him. You're like, holy cow, he's enormous.
Right, and I think from a game planning standpoint, as a coach, I mean, you're not used to, putting a game plan together. And I think a lot of times what we're going to see in the tournament is the game plans are going to be very black and white versus playing off of instincts. You talk about Rutgers, who probably plays better, who's played the best against Zach Edey more than anybody. It's not black and white. It's just kind of a feel. It's an instinct. It's kind of gambling on certain possessions. And I think that's going to be an advantage for Purdue because it's going to be a lot of black and white. They're going to double on either the second dribble or on the catch. It's going to be the same look every single time. It's going to be consistent. And I think it's going to be easier for Purdue to read and kind of get open shots on the perimeter or inside in the post.
So let's dive into the team that Purdue beat for the Big Ten championship yesterday. That is Penn State. I think they're a little underseeded as a 10, but I would say the team that they're facing is very underseeded in Texas A&M. Underseeding, to me, there's an unfairness to it for the rest of the bracket because, think about it, if you're a 2 seed and you either get Texas A&M as a 7 or Penn State as a 10, you're like, oh, those teams are a little bit better than a typical 7 and 10. So I do get that. I almost think if you're going to underseed 2 teams, you might as well have them play one another because then some of the unfairness of it, for lack of a better word, is offset. But, man, we've been saying for a while here, Trey, that if Penn State can make it to the NCAA tourney, they're a team that can win some games because they, in much the same way that Zach Edey provides this very unusual challenge, I think Penn State provides a very unusual challenge as well in the way that they spread the floor and in the uniqueness of the way that Jalen Pickett plays.
Yeah, I mean, there's not another guy like Jalen Pickett in the country, right? And it's kind of the same thing when we talk about Zach Edey. Like Big Ten teams, they've been able to kind of prepare. They've watched Jalen Pickett a ton. Coaches are up at night thinking of ways how they can stop Penn State's offense all year long. But once you get into the NCAA tournament, there's not a player in the country that has their point guard who's their best post-up player and who can post up from the wing, who can post up from the elbow, who can post up from the low block. And so once again, it's just a matter of, a lot of teams are going to play black and white defense where they're going to stick to their principles, stick to the principles that they've done all year long. And I think that bodes well for a team like Penn State that has so many shooters. Always play with potentially 4 shooter to go along with Pickett if Dredd is playing the 5. And so I look at Texas A&M. Buzz Williams is a team. He coaches his teams in a way where they're going to gamble a lot. They're going to double. They're going to trap. They're going to play aggressively. And I think with the way that Penn State's spacing is, the way that they move the basket.
Just a little perspective on Texas A&M and kind of why are they underseeded when you look at some of their metrics. They lost to Murray State and Wofford early in the year, and that really killed them in terms of their resume. But if you look at them, I love Bart Torvik. I talk about the site all the time because it allows you to kind of sort the data by dates and you can kind of do all kinds. You can play around with it a little bit more. If you go on Bart Torvik and you sort since January 1st, they are a top 10 team in the country, Texas A&M, top 10. And they're a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. Now, again, Penn State's playing fabulously, too. If you're Texas A&M, you don't want to see Penn State as a 10 seed. But I'm just saying, like, Texas A&M in 2023 has been playing great. Like, this is a really challenging team to go up against.
Absolutely. And they got great guard play. I mean, they have a point guard who's one of the better point guards in the SEC that can break you off the bounce, that's able to find guys. And, they just have good leadership. Good, Buzz Williams, runs a great program, has been able to do a really good job there in College Station. And so this is going to be a tough test because, as you mentioned, I mean, 2 teams that are really playing at a high level. I think Penn State, the biggest thing is going to be rebounding the basketball, being able to play within the paint to match the physicality of a Texas A&M team. And I think if they can do that, they can knock down perimeter shots because they didn't shoot the ball great in the Big Ten tournament. And one of the things, though, that I did like that Penn State did in the Big Ten tournament was they got to the foul line a lot. I thought they played strong with the basketball, strong drives, were able to kind of produce some offense even though they didn't shoot the ball great. Texas A&M is a very physical team. They foul a lot. They're one of the leaders in the country in fouls per game. And so I think you got to be able to get to the foul line, get some confidence on the offensive end, be strong with the ball, and then knock down perimeter shots.
You mentioned the rebounding. Texas A&M, fabulous offensive rebounding team.
Yeah.
So Penn State's got to clean up on the defensive glass, as we know, a little bit undersized. Penn State had an amazing run through the Big Ten tournament, making all the way to that championship game. Among the teams they knocked off, Northwestern. The Wildcats were the number 2 seed, but did not win a game in the tournament. They get into the NCAA tournament as a 7 seed. They head to Sacramento. They'll take on Boise State, a team out of the Mountain West that has never won an NCAA tourney game. The Broncos 0-8 all time. What do you think of this matchup for Northwestern against Boise State and then potentially against UCLA, a team that was very much in the discussion for a 1 seed?
I really like the chances for the Wildcats to get to the second weekend. I mean, I know obviously it's been, a historic season. So a lot of times when that happens, you're kind of playing with house money, which can go both ways. But I think this team is going to come in with a chip on their shoulder. They're going to come in with the edge. Boise State is a great defensive team, the second best defensive team in the Mountain West. They're a heavy help side team, so they're going to really load up on Boo Buie, on all his penetrations, all his ball screen actions. Northwestern, I think the biggest key is knocking down perimeter shots and being confident. 11th in the conference in three-point shooting. Didn't shoot the ball great in the Big Ten tournament. They're going to need guys like Robbie Band, Ty Berry, Brooks Barnhizer to be able to be aggressive and knock down perimeter shots because this Boise State team is very, very stiff defensively.
I agree with you. When Northwestern is hitting outside shots, they are really, really good. Like you think about the game at Nebraska, you think about the home game against Iowa. When they are on, because their defense is going to be good, that becomes the challenge. The issue is, and Brooks Barnhizer's really emerged here as, I guess you would say, a third scorer. I mean, he's just been fabulous, couple double-doubles in a row. The issue, obviously, is that Chase Audige has not played well. So your second scorer has disappeared a little bit while your third scorer has emerged. If they can get Audige going, if Buie can hit from the outside, no doubt, because they don't turn the ball over a whole lot. They force a lot of turnovers themselves. There are a lot of things they do that make them a challenging team, right? Yeah. Again, they play this style that is, I don't want to say extreme, but it is pronounced.
Yeah.
And I think teams that play pronounced styles that are maybe a little different than what you face typically in your league, those are challenging teams to face in a tournament setting. And Northwestern is one of those teams with the way that they, trap the post. But you got to be able to put the ball in the basket.
Yeah, and that's a great point about just stylistically. Boise State has never seen a defense like Northwestern, so that's going to be something very interesting to watch. But to go to Audige, he shot 3 of 14 against Penn State, but I went back and watched all his misses. Only one shot was a bad shot. He got really good looks, and I think that's encouraging, I think, if you're the Wildcats, if you're a Wildcat fan, because a lot of times when he kind of goes into those, those stretches where he's shooting under 30% from the field, it's a lot of tough shot, a lot of contested threes, but a lot of those shots that he missed were within the flow of the offense, and they almost went in. A lot of them were just short or just long. They weren't bad misses per se. And so I think Chase Audige has the right mindset coming into the tournament. I think he just has to kind of flush everything that's happened in the past month and think of this as a new season. And I think if that happens, you get a third scorer, and now all of a sudden you're in the potential to get into the 70s and be able to score and be able to compete against a good team in Boise State who's very stiff defensively.
No doubt. When he is good, he's really good. And they are really good when he gets going. So we'll see whether or not they can make that happen. And then potentially UCLA. I mean, UCLA, look, they're really good. They are banged up.
Yeah.
So I think there's some potential there. But you got Jaime Jaquez, who's one of the best players in the country. Tiger Campbell, outstanding point guard. No doubt they're not the team that they were a week ago, 2 weeks ago, with the absence of Jalen Clark, with Dembona hurt. That's an issue, no doubt. I mean, they built a resume with those guys. the one thing I'll say is if you watch them on Saturday night, they look pretty good without those guys.
Yeah, they did. I mean, UCLA, you got a veteran team. This is a team that's been to the Final Four with that core group a couple years ago as an 11 seed. And so it's going to be a tough matchup. But I think the fact that you're losing Jalen Clark, who's one of their best defenders, one of the best defenders in the Pac-12, I think that bodes well because now that's one less defender that can be on Boo Buie, Chase Aldidra, Brooks Barnhizer if they were to get past Boise State potentially. But how about this? Sweet 16 matchup potentially. Let's assume that Northwestern, I'm thinking, best case scenario, they can get to Vegas and get a rematch against Gonzaga. That would be something, and something I probably would have to get out to Vegas for.
That West region, by the way, man, is it loaded.
Yes.
If you're a believer in Ken Pom and those metrics, 4 of the top 8 and 5 of the top 11 teams in the country are in the West region. Northwestern not the only Big Ten team that's in it. Illinois is there as well. One more look at those first-round Big Ten matchups. 8 teams in, 1 shy of the all-time record, which was set each of the last 2 seasons. Definitely some surprise that Rutgers did not make it. They were the second team out. We're going to dive into that snub a little bit later in the show. Dave Revson and Trey Dempsell will continue with the teams that did make it. I think Indiana's draw is really interesting. They got a 4 seed, which is favorable to me. Yeah. I was fearing that they might end up dropping to a 5. I think, honestly, you could have made a case for them as a 5, so delighted from their point of view that they got a 4. They get Rob Senderoff and Kent State in the first matchup. He is a former Indiana assistant, actually had to resign in the wake of the whole Kelvin Sampson mess. And then potentially, were they to win 2 games, they would go up against Kelvin Sampson if Houston makes it through. So you always go through these brackets, and I can tell you as one who sat through the mock process, they do not sit here and try to devise these matchups. The bracketing is extremely mechanical. It's the fastest thing that happens. It doesn't take very much time at all. It is really more about developing the overall seed list. But then you get into the bracket and you get these great storylines. What do you think of Indiana, starting with that matchup with the Golden Flashes?
Kent State is going to be an extremely tough matchup. It's a defensive-minded team. They're undersized, but they're extremely physical. They're extremely gritty. And I think, you're going to need your star to be a star. Because this is one of the smallest teams in the country, according to Ken Pom, they're going to have a hard time guarding TJD. I'm sure, similar to Zach Edey in their matchups, they're going to send double teams, triple teams. And so he's going to be able to have to read the defense, be able to know when to score, when to pass the ball out. And then other guys on the perimeter are going to be able to knock down perimeter shots. In the Big Ten tournament, they shot 6 of 26 from 3. So I think it's a confidence thing going into this NCAA tournament, because even if they get past Kent State, potentially Miami, another undersized team that plays 5 guards around the perimeter. So they're going to see if they are able to get past Kent State, kind of 2 similar teams stylistically in terms of being undersized, being able to kind of spread you out. I think another thing to watch is TJD defensively, right? Because he's probably going to have to guard a guy that's 6'5", 6'6", on the perimeter. And so keeping him out of foul trouble, I think teams are going to try to attack him on the offensive end. So it's going to be tough matchups, but I like the advantage that Indiana has in the post.
In Miami, a hot team, really good guards, Nigel Pack, Isaiah Wong. They've won 9 of their last 11. They pounded Maryland earlier this year. I wouldn't dismiss Drake either. I think Drake is really good and really well coached. But let's say Indiana gets through those first couple games. The Kelvin Sampson, the potential of that matchup, I think might have some Hoosier fans salivating.
Oh, man, that is going to be a great matchup. The fact, though, that, it's kind of uncertain right now where Marcus Sasser's health status stands, that completely changes the dynamic of Houston in terms of what they can do in terms of scoring, because even though they have a lot of depth, they have a lot of guys who are extremely physical, extremely good on the defensive end, great athletes. They rely heavily upon Marcus Sasser. And so I think if Indiana gets that matchup, because of the lack of depth from the scoring standpoint that Houston has, I really like the Hoosiers to kind of advance past them.
IU would be facing a team that leads the nation in field goal percentage defense in Houston. We know the Hoosiers have been the best shooting team in the Big Ten. So again, strength against strength. You mentioned Sasser, the groin injury in the AAC semifinal. He did not play against Memphis yesterday. Unclear what his status would be going forward. It didn't seem like it was a season-ending type thing, but he is hugely important to what Houston does. One of the best players, frankly, in the country. Let's move on to Maryland and West Virginia. We were talking about this last night with Raphael and Andy on our bracket special on Big Ten basketball and beyond, and I was saying I think this is going to be an incredibly physical game.
Oh my goodness.
Like West Virginia gets up into you, and I think Maryland has the guys to match that. I don't think they'll be the least bit intimidated by that. It doesn't mean they're going to win the game. It just means they are more than willing to grind it out with Huggins in West Virginia.
This is going to be like a classic inner city AAU game. It's going to be so fun to watch. I mean, both teams potentially pressing for a good chunk of the game. You got two coaches who, preach physicality, preach toughness. I think this is going to be a great game, but I'm really looking at, how Maryland is going to play if the opposing crowd kind of gets into the game, right? Because even in the second half, and their loss in the Big Ten tournament against the Hoosiers. As soon as that opposing crowd kind of gets into the game, and I'm sure West Virginia will travel to Alabama, I'm interested to see kind of how the Maryland Terrapins respond in those situations. And they're in the Big Ten tournament, Maryland shot 25% from the field in the second half. Jameer Young went 1 of 10. So they have to be able to kind of handle adversity, be able to get into their offense, play with that same passion, play with that same spark on both ends of the floor, even when the opposing crowd kind of gets into the game. But if they're able to get past West Virginia, then they have to play Alabama in Alabama.
Yes,
so, I mean, it's going to be a tough matchup either way. But, Maryland has had a great season thus far, no matter what happens. You can't take away what Kevin Willard has done to this program. And so I think they're kind of playing with house money, but at the same time, they're going to be hungry to come in here and get a few wins in the NCAA tournament.
And I think Maryland will travel very well. It's tougher for Maryland fans to get to Chicago than it is, I think, to get to Birmingham.
Sure.
And just kind of the notion of the NCAA tournament and going in and supporting your team, especially after not making it a year ago. They should have a pretty good crowd, one would think, there as well. But I agree with you, especially once you get into, you're going to be playing a de facto road game if you play Alabama. Now, I know Maryland fans would say, well, we'd love to have that problem because that would mean we get through West Virginia. Bama's #1 overall seed. They present all kinds of problems. I do think the one thing with Alabama is they've got a ton of controversy swirling around them, as everyone who follows college basketball is well aware. And you do wonder, they've been able to kind of protect their guys from the national media. You're not going to be able to do that in the NCAA tournament, right? You're in these open locker room situations. I do wonder a little bit about the challenge of that, but man, they are a really good team.
Yeah, they have two of everything, right? I mean, they have so much depth at each position. You talk about Brandon Miller, obviously, who's one of the best freshmen in the country. You got Quiverly in the guard play that Alabama has. They have a ton of guys, Brandley as well, guys that they can give the ball to in open space and that are three-level scorers. And so I think when I look at Alabama, if you were to kind of put some of those guys who are, third and fourth options on another team, they would probably be the first option. They just have so much depth on the offensive end. But I like the fact that Maryland is a team that kind of can switch up defenses and kind of get you off rhythm. They can mix in some zone. They can be able to press. And that's why I kind of go back to the fact that if they can just kind of play like they do at the Xfinity Center with that much energy, when they're trapping and when they're able to kind of force teams to be able to be a little bit more uncomfortable, if they can do that in a neutral site environment, I think they can have success against even the likes of a team like Alabama.
And here's the one thing I'd say about Alabama. And we've talked about this in light of Purdue starting an all-freshman backcourt. They start 3 freshmen. Now, I know their freshmen are great.
Yes.
Right? So I'm not like, I get it. They're really, really talented. But it's still 3 freshmen. And Maryland is a veteran team with guys who have kind of been through it.
Absolutely.
You do wonder a little bit. Again, kind of experience. You get to March, and that helps you. But again, don't want to get ahead of ourselves. They got to beat the Mountaineers, and that is not going to be easy. After an amazing year, the Big Ten advancing 7 teams to the women's tourney. That does include 2 teams in the first 4. Illinois gets it going on Wednesday, Purdue on Thursday. The 7 teams in the dance ties for the second most of any conference. It's tied for the most in Big Ten history. Autumn Johnson has been providing insight into this fantastic league for us all season. She joins me now. Autumn, as you look at this bracket and the Big Ten teams, what do you think of how they were treated, how they were seeded, and basically kind of what the NCAA determined in terms of the Big Ten?
Yeah, I mean, you said it right off the top. 7 deserving Big Ten teams, which matches last year. It just shows how strong and consistent this conference is day in and day out. We always talk about the SEC, ACC, Pac-12, but these coming years, I feel like the Big Ten has really taken women's basketball by storm by consistently being in the conversation. We saw how many teams consistently stayed in the top 25. And this season, I think we could possibly see 1 or 2 teams in the Final Four. So that's really exciting. But overall, the impressions of how I thought the tournament kind of shook out and, just how big teams are seeded. I love where Indiana sits as number 1, some first timers on that one line. So I had that right on the money with my bracket prediction. Iowa as a 2 seed. I thought they made a strong case to be a 1. Maryland and Ohio State as a 2 and 3 seed was exactly what I predicted. Michigan, I thought they could have been as high as a 5 seed, but they sit as a 6. I think that last stretch of games kind of hurt them of injuries and having Leah Brown out. And then Purdue and Illinois playing in. Purdue, I had them as a 10 seed, but they are an 11. And Illinois as an 11 seed really shocked me playing in for this tournament. I thought that was a little questionable with the resume that they were able to build up this season.
Well, let's take a deeper dive into some of this. Let's start with Indiana. They are so good. They actually got, as we talked about, a number 1 vote a couple weeks ago. South Carolina's had a stranglehold on that all year. How realistic are Indiana's chances as you look at the bracket for making it to the Final Four for the first time ever?
Yeah, I just mentioned it. I think 1 or 2 teams are going to the Final Four when it comes to the Big Ten, and Indiana is one of them that I think can do it. And I've already filled out my bracket. They do have a tough route to get there when you look at their first round opponents and second round opponents, possibly in the second round facing either an ACC or a Big 12 team in Oklahoma State and Miami. I have Miami moving forward in that matchup when it comes down to it, which Miami has been able to take down some quality foes in a tough ACC conference. You have either Villanova or FGCU, Washington State sitting over in that other bracket. It could be a gauntlet over there with tons of sleepers. But for the most part, I think it might be an FGCU or a Villanova that comes out on top, which is an offensive star power team in both teams. It'll be fun to see if we can get a Mackenzie Holmes versus Maddie Siegrist matchup. But I think for Indiana, their defense, their balance, and their depth is going to take them a long way. We saw that on full display, starting off with a 19-0 record to start the season. Had an early exit than expected in the Big Ten tournament, but came out on top as the regular season champs. I just think the veteran leadership, the poise, the discipline of this team is going to give them the edge. And honestly, I said Final Four. I have them in my championship game going up against South Carolina. So if it all shakes out of how I think.
Hoping it does, based on what you just told me. So Indiana, of course, they made the Elite Eight a couple of years ago, Sweet 16 last year. We'll see whether they can take that extra step, as Autumn is predicting. 2 seeds, Iowa and Maryland. You had mentioned you thought Iowa was in that conversation. I think everyone thought it was going to come down to them and Stanford. It felt like maybe the committee would look at Stanford and the fact they didn't play as well here down the stretch and give Iowa the nod. It didn't work out that way. Are you surprised? Or, you mentioned that that's kind of where you had them, but what's your take on why they ended up as a 2 rather than a 1?
I was surprised, but I understand it a little bit. Stanford, we saw a lot of slip outs throughout the course of the season. They had 5 losses on the season. 2 of those were unranked wins. And they had an unexpected loss when it came down to it to become the co-champs of now the Pac-12, which is something they usually dominate. And they had an early exit in the Pac-12 tournament. So, Stanford, I thought, would be a 2 seed with the recency of how they've been playing down the stretch, considering Iowa, who has been blazing hot, one of the hottest teams, I think, and believe that is in the nation. Yes, they did have 6 slip-ups throughout the course of the season, but they finished super strong as the Big Ten champs. And I think the selection committee, when it came down to it, it was resume over recency. So it's not about what Stanford did down the stretch, because they had a second in the nation to South Carolina in top 50 net wins. So they kind of got that edge over teams, and that's what kept them on the 1 line.
How difficult is Iowa's path to the Final Four?
I think one of the most difficult routes compared to other teams, considering just in general, I think the Seattle regions are kind of tough on both ends. But if you look at Iowa's path, I mean, they have to go up against an SEC foe or either ACC foe in Florida State or Georgia, which both have strong players in Tanaya Latson over at Florida State and Diamond Battles, who is coming over from UCF and now transferred over to Georgia. She single-handedly almost took down UConn last year in that tournament. So I'm excited to see what she does in this one. But the Sweet 16, they could possibly face Duke, and Duke is one of the toughest teams on defense, actually number 2 scoring defense in the nation, and that's paced by Celeste Taylor. And this was actually a game that we saw in the last regular season, actually, when Iowa went up against this team and they fell in that one. But if they can get to it, which I have my bracket right here and referring to it, if they can get to it, I have Stanford and Iowa facing off in the Elite Eight. So, hey, I guess they're going to have to show why they should have been a 1 seed, and that's the perfect way to do it.
That is a really tough region, as you said, 4 of the top 11 in the net in one region. So that's not an easy path. What about the draw for Maryland? What stands out there?
I think they do have not an easier route, but a lighter route, I would say. A lot of these teams are tough, but, you have South Carolina also in that region, who are the defending national champs. They have depth, they have size, they have talent. They're consistently a top defense in the nation, and they've also elevated their offense this season. But I'm excited if that is a rematch, because we saw that on opening night, right? This Maryland team is completely different, brought in tons of transfers that are finally starting to click together and playing at the best basketball at the right time. But that was a 25-point loss when these two teams faced off, and Diamond Miller wasn't in that matchup. So that's completely going to be a difference maker when it comes down to it.
See if they can make it past the Sweet 16 for the first time since 2015. Ohio State, meanwhile, they get to host the first and second rounds as a 4 seed. We saw them with J.C. Sheldon back. They looked really good. Give us a sense of Ohio State and the path for them as they try to make a deep run.
I mean, with J.C. Sheldon back, that's tremendous. I mean, this is the engine for their team. She ignites their press. She's such a disruptive guard, and she had massive clutch plays down the stretch with that massive 3 that we saw, and even followed up with a defensive stop. I mean, I just think that just gives teams in Ohio State an edge when you have a player like J.C. Sheldon. And the adversity that this team had to face all season long, I think that allowed other players to step up in her absence. And now I think that makes them even more of a dangerous balanced attack. So it's a tough journey, I believe, ahead for Ohio State. As I mentioned, those Seattle regions are a gauntlet. In the second round, they could possibly face North Carolina, Sweet 16. You have a team in UConn who's starting to get healthy this season. And then Virginia Tech is a 1 seed in this region, who is one of the hottest teams in the nation. They're on an 11-game winning streak. They just won their first ever ACC title when it all comes down to it. So if they can continue to click on all cylinders on the offensive end and get that press going, that stifling defense that they run, I think they'll be just fine to make a deep run.
Haven't been past the Sweet 16 since 1993, so we'll see whether or not this is the year for them. We mentioned Michigan is in, Illinois is in, Purdue. We'll break down those matchups as the week goes on, but I want to ask you about who you think is going to come out on top, and I'll ask you in this way. We know how good South Carolina is. If you are putting together a bracket and you're asked either South Carolina or everyone else in the field, who would you take? Like, how confident are you in South Carolina emerging as the champ?
I'm pretty confident, and I mentioned it at the top because South Carolina, they just have so much size, so much talent, so much depth. They have the defending National Player of the Year in Aaliyah Boston, and it's not just her this year. It's Isaiah Cook now. It's a Raven Johnson. It's Camila Cardoso, who's coming off the bench and providing so much for this team. It is endless amount of depth that this team has, and, their defense was never in question last year, and consistently it was their offense last year that kind of fluctuated, but they've answered all of those questions this year, and I think Zia Cook has been tremendous in that way. I haven't even mentioned Bree Bill, who has been an incredible two-way player for this team and has been knocking it down beyond the arc, giving this team an offensive lift. But I think it is South Carolina versus everyone, and I do have them as the, champs coming back into that championship round, going up against Indiana. So we'll see how it shakes out. But I do love the fact that possibly Indiana could face them, because if any team could match up with them, I think it would be Indiana.
They are loaded, South Carolina. We've seen some very brief moments of vulnerability. Saw Ole Miss take them to overtime. So who knows? Just one game. That's the beauty of the NCAA tournament. But they are really good behind Dawn Staley. All right, Autumn, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll catch up with you as the tourney proceeds here.
Yes, can't wait for it. Let the madness begin.
Yes, let it begin indeed. We are back on Big Ten today. We already talked about Indiana. Iowa is in the top half of the Midwest as well. They are taking on Auburn in Birmingham. A little strange that a 9 seed would get to play in its home state, but that's what the Hawks are up against. And we were talking about this last night. There's a real contrast in styles, not philosophically for Bruce Pearl. I mean, Bruce Pearl doesn't want to be a defensive-oriented team, but to his credit, that's kind of what he's got this year, and I think they've embraced it, and we have seen them play some really low-scoring games, including one against Northwestern. They won 43-42. They've been scoring a little bit better lately, but I mean, really is Iowa wants to get up and down, and Auburn would love to kind of put a stranglehold on them.
Yeah, you put it perfectly. I mean, this is an Auburn team that is a defensive-minded team. They don't have a ton of options, especially on the perimeter outside of Wendell Green, of guys that can create out the bounce and score. They rely heavily on Johnny Broome, a transfer that has come in. It's kind of a similar player in stylistically as Chris Murray, left-handed guy, a versatile forward that can score from the block, that can score from the high post. And so I think that's going to be a fun matchup for fans to watch, is Chris Murray against Broome, if they end up guarding each other. But yeah, you hit it right on the head. This is a complete contrast of styles. When you look at Iowa, who wants to get up a ton of threes, they want to get up and down. Auburn is a very good three-point defensive team. They guard the three-point line, I think, in the top 20 in the country. So I think that's going to be something to watch. And I think for Iowa, what I'm really looking for is if they could just be solid defensively, I think they could really make a run here in the NCAA tournament. I mean, in the Big Ten tournament, they gave up 56 points to the backcourt of Ohio State. And so if you can guard a guy like Wendell Green, if you can guard in the block a guy like Broome and kind of take those guys away, or at least make them high volume, it kind of limits what Auburn has on the offensive end. And then now all of a sudden you're able to kind of have the advantage on both ends of the floor.
And you just feel like if Iowa can solve Auburn's defense a little bit, it's unclear whether Auburn can keep up with them, right? I mean, they're just not a team that has a lot of scoring options. They're 314th in the nation in three-point percentage. So if Iowa can get going and get hot, it does feel like maybe they can just put a little distance between themselves and the Tigers. It's interesting to see, again, these matchups, because if you win that game, we've already talked about Houston, but again, another team, and they are really good defensively, another team that you get that would be a huge contrast in styles. And then, of course, you're going to have a lot written about Bruce Pearl and his time at Iowa. I don't think that impacts anyone on the court. Right. I mean, it was a long time ago. It was long before any of these guys were born, but it's still just interesting given the way things ended for Bruce Pearl as an assistant for Tom Davis and now facing the Hawkeyes in the NCAA tournament. What about Illinois and Arkansas? That, for an 8-9 game, I mean, you want to talk about big brands. These are two big brands. Arkansas hasn't played great down the stretch. This feels like an opportunity for Illinois. What do you think of the matchup?
I think it's like two of the most unpredictable teams in the country going up against each other. So it's like one of those games you just really don't know what you're going to get. You don't know which team is going to show up. When you look at Arkansas, they rely heavily upon, freshman guards. You talk about Anthony Black, Nick Smith. Those two guys are top 15 picks potentially in the NBA draft. Extremely talented, but extremely young. And so a lot of times when Arkansas plays, it's just inconsistent, but then you see those flashes of talent. I mean, they have Brazel, who's also a very talented forward who can score, averaging about 12 points per game. And so it's going to be a fun matchup just because I think there's going to be a lot of talent on the floor. There's going to be a lot of scoring. There might be a lot of bad shots, potentially in this matchup, in terms of, guys who have a lot of ability, but just, take some questionable ones at times. So I think it could be a game that could maybe be in the 80s, but it also could be a low percentage game in the 60s. And I think it just comes down to which team plays with more poise down the stretch if this is a close one.
I think that's what's been so frustrating for me about Illinois, and I think for a lot of people who have watched them, is they are so talented. But I keep coming back to this stat. I cited it last week. I'll cite it again. In conference play, they were first in the Big Ten in 2-point percentage. They were last in the Big Ten in 3-point percentage, and they shot the 4th highest percentage of threes of anyone in the Big Ten. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And you say, there's the potential for them to take bad shots. Just where is the gap as a player between, hey, because Brad Underwood knows analytics. Like, he completely overhauled the way that he played after 2 years because the analytics were telling him it just wasn't working.
Yep.
And he hired someone to break it all down for him.
Right.
So he is acutely aware of kind of what they should be doing and what they are doing. Where is that gap in communication between player and coach? Like, how does that happen?
Well, I'll be honest, because I play pretty similar to Terrence Shannon Jr. and Matthew Meyer. Analytics are kind of out the window. I'm just thinking, how can I help my team score? And a lot of times you kind of have this, at times, unrealistic belief in yourself. And I think that's the kind of players that Matthew Meyer and Terrence Shannon Jr. are, for better or for worse. And so this is one of those teams in the NCAA tournament that can be extremely dangerous in terms of their ability to get hot from three. But I think at the end of the day, you are who you are. I think if you're a player, you're not going to sit down now at the NCAA tournament starting, look at the analytics, look at the fact that, to your point, which is a great point, that this is a great 2-point shooting team, and I'm going to take a ton of twos and high percentage shots and work the offense around. I mean, Illinois doesn't really have a true point guard that's, that's really in place right now that, with just Jaden Epps' status. And so, I just think at the end of the day, you are who you are. They're going to be, aggressive on the offensive end, take some tough ones, but you just hope maybe that they hit some of them and balance it out with some twos.
I guess so. I mean, I do agree with your notion that they're not changing at this point in the year. Right? They've done what they've done. We did see Jaden Epps briefly in the Big Ten tournament, so we'll hope that he is fully healthy for them because, as you said, point guard, especially once Sky Clark left the program,
right.
Jaden Epps did an amazing job there as a scoring point for the Illini. Izzo, pretty remarkable here, his 25th straight NCAA tourney appearance. It's the longest streak ever for any head coach. You look at the guys that he nudged ahead of, Bill Self, Mike Krzyzewski, Mark Few, Dean Smith on that list. 25 NCAA tourneys in a row, by the way, is the longest streak ever for a Big Ten team. It's the second longest active streak behind only Kansas. But again, the difference here is that Izzo's been at the helm for each and every one of them. First up for the Spartans is USC, a future Big Ten member. What do you think of this matchup for Michigan State?
I really like this matchup because where Michigan State has really struggled is playing against dominant interior players. And then you look at this USC team, they're very guard-oriented. You look at Boogie Ellis, who's a first-team all-conference guard, very high-volume, three-level scorer. And then Drew Peterson is kind of a talented, oversized guard per se. And so they rely heavily upon those two guys. They don't get a lot of post-production on the offensive end. So I really like that matchup. And then if you get past that, you're potentially going up against Marquette, where it's the same thing, where you got Tyler Kolek, who's a Big East Player of the Year. Cam Jones is an extremely high-volume scorer as well. And so I kind of like the matchups going into the NCAA tournament because they don't have to play against a dominant big where they've really struggled. But I think they do have to do a good job on these guards, right? You talk about in the Big Ten tournament, Bruce Thornton goes for 21-7. They did pretty bad job on him. He was kind of able to have his way, getting into the paint, finding guys. The pick and roll defense was kind of a question mark. And so I think if they're able to contain guards, because I don't think they're going to shoot 3 of 16 from three like they did in their loss in the Big Ten tournament. I thought that was just kind of a one-off type of deal. I think they have a chance here. I have them going to the Elite Eight personally, just because I believe in guards in March. They have guys that can put the ball in the hole. They have guys with a ton of confidence. They have a ton of options offensively. So I really like this Michigan State team and their draw.
We only have a couple minutes left. I do want to touch on Rutgers. Just heartbreaking to me. You spend so much time around these programs and get to know some of the players, certainly get to know the the coaches, and I just thought they had so much adversity thrown at them this year. They had all kinds of injury problems, and it felt like they had figured it out. And then Mawot Mag went down, and they end up getting left out. You could quibble a lot with it, and we did quibble with it last night. I mean, there's just nothing on Nevada's resume at all. You look at the 3 games they lost down the stretch. I just don't understand how you lose to 3 sub-90 net teams in your last 3 games and somehow get into this field. NC State has 1 quad 1 win, and they're in the ACC.
Right.
So I think Rutgers stacks up favorably. What do you make of the fact they were left out?
Yeah, I didn't agree with it. I mean, I thought it was just one of those deals that it was a tough draw. I think at the end of the day, the committee looked at that quad 3 record of 2-4.
Yeah.
I think that was, and the nail in the coffin probably was that Minnesota game where they were up double digits in the last few minutes of the game, and Jamison Battle obviously hits that game-winning shot. You know, that was kind of, set the deal. I think at that point, I feel like the committee kind of made their mind up potentially with this Rutgers team, and they had to make a deep run in the Big Ten tournament to potentially get in. But I think it's unfortunate because, I mean, they're 40 in the net, 35 in KenPom, 26 in the BPI, 10-10 in quad 1 and quad 2. Just unfortunate draw.
Yeah, I do think that Minnesota game was probably the killer. I will say this. There was an admission of an officiating error in the Ohio State game, so they would have had another road win against a really good team in Ohio State, a quad 1 win that they probably earned. Anyway, it's a shame. We'll see you tomorrow.